Your brother told us how you be all into reading and shit. Hey, that's some real good shit. Congratulations.
Did you just congratulate me for reading?
And once again, we're live for another lethal discussion. They just keep coming up.
Yeah, every day.
It's kind of odd, isn't it, how when it first started out, it was kind of hard not to think of topics, but just getting it going, and now it's just the concept of just dropping the mic and just letting the time roll.
Well, it's just lovely that we have so much time and opportunity. We can bullshit about our favorite movies and books and whatever happened. Yeah, whatever we happen to be going over.
Unfortunately, there seems to be enough of a market out there for people to want to have the same kind of interests as we do, or review the same kind of things that they already liked.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of that sense, today what we're going to be talking about is Crime and Punishment.
CP! Woo! The big one. Well, they made it into a movie, right?
Yeah,
so that kind of makes it big.
It's pretty big, no matter what.
It's one of those classics that people always talk about when they're talking about classic novels.
It does get brought up every single time. As far as I go, when it comes to my inception into the book, it was strictly through listening to Jordan Peterson's lectures. And the thing that got me was his mentioning of how Dostoevsky's books parallel Nietzsche's books, and how actually Nietzsche was drawing inspiration from Dostoevsky's book. And I was like, well, that's interesting.
Really?
Trying to find where the actual source of the well is, kind of situation. Mm-hmm. Because I had already been reading Nietzsche prior and thinking that he was awesome, and trying to figure out where exactly it is that he got the mindset that he did. And you can totally tell after reading the prose, because Nietzsche, aside from Zarathustra, where he tries his best, but bless him, but he does a poor job of actually trying to make a story when trying to lay down his ethics. Dostoevsky does it perfectly. He encapsulates and crystallizes what he's trying to say about the existentialist ennui within all of his characters so perfectly, in that it's no wonder that Nietzsche drew inspiration and then tried to be the summarizer of that afterwards, the analyzer, like what we're trying to do, but us in a more low resolution situation.
And he was philosophizing with a hammer. Is that the quote attributed to Nietzsche? Yeah, that makes sense, because when you read Dostoevsky, even though the writing takes a lot of liberties, he is the way that he formulates his characters through his dialogue and through their actions, the general prose of it, you can tell that he's a fucking author. You know what I mean?
Right.
Compared to...
Mostly just because he doesn't seem to care.
Right.
That's kind of one of the very interesting aspects of it, especially for myself, trying to be a budding writer myself whenever I get the opportunity, is seeing how whenever he feels like he's getting cornered, he'll just write himself out of it and go forward with whatever he's trying to project as a macroscopic moral in his story. He writes as he needs to, as opposed to feeling constrained, which is something that sometimes I feel.
I feel that often.
And perhaps that just comes to show that sometimes when trying to play God in the writing of a story, sometimes the story overtakes you. And the real showcasing of craftsmanship is the ability to not have the story overreign you. In the same way when you try to tame an animal or any other sort of similar parallel like that. So with all that preamble in terms of the prose, we can get into the actual meat of the book. And spoiler alert, this is an analysis again. If you're this deep into our conversations, you already know we go full throttle on every single thing we find interesting. If you haven't read the book, we would appreciate if you read it first, because I think you would feel what we feel as we're talking about it right now. But if you haven't yet and you just want to get the general gist and just the spirit of the book, is really what we're going to be trying to sell to you today, is either it magnetizes you or it speaks to you in some way. We'd say pick it up in some way. Try to do so either through audiobooks, I know that's big, and just the old conventional reading.
Always a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Trying to do that. Yeah, I don't know if that book would work so good as an audiobook. Just because of its liberties in its writing,
Hey.
you know.
Audiobooks have come a long way.
That's true. I guess, yeah.
It's tough to say. I'm not an audiobook listener. I still enjoy reading over listening to it. But, well, when it comes to the characters, let's bring out the main cast. First of all is protagonist numero uno, Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov.
Raskolnikov.
Rodia for short.
There's this cool thing in this book where some of the characters' names are super fun to say.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, that's a very, very fun thing. If you can actually get into the rhythm of how the name is supposed to come out, you actually begin to look forward to saying the full thing.
It's funner to read in your mind, as you're going through it. But yeah, so Raskolnikov, our protagonist.
What's there to say about the guy, huh?
Well, yeah, his name literally means schism, right? Or something like that in Russian, which is pretty appropriate for the book.
He is a man of two minds, for sure. I think that's one of his most shining attributes, is the fact that he is as much Cain as Abel, if there ever was a literary figure to be so. Because he holds every single one of the virtues that, within the context of his society and also our society, to have the aptitude to do great things. And at the same time, that very same aptitude can easily translate to very, very dark motives if left unchecked, to the egotism of oneself.
Which is what happens in Raskolnikov's line of thinking that leads him to murder a woman.
Right.
Yeah.
Alyona Ivanovna, or the old pawnbroker.
Yes, the louse. That's super interesting. That all it really took for Raskolnikov to murder somebody, and it seems like a really big decision to make, to murder somebody, but all it really took for him was a couple hours of introspective thought that sort of led him down this gutter of thinking of that it didn't matter if this person lived or died, and it would probably be better if she did die.
It's actually interesting because I found that the festering of that idea had come from much further away, from much longer in the past, because if you recall, when Porfiry, the attorney, meets him when they meet at his office, they talk about his old college thesis and about the extraordinary man.
That's right. Yeah.
And he had already begun conceptualizing an idea of what it is that personifies somebody that can be above the law, per se.
That's exactly what it was. It was something that he was like, great men that change the future are the ones that ignore the law, the ones
The
that
old
go,
laws.
right, the ones that go beyond and sometimes and usually change the laws because of their actions.
And they're never afraid to shed blood. He always makes that a very, very clear point.
I never thought about that. Yeah.
And it's really funny because they kind of, in that scene, they make a little fun of him, because although at that time no one is really entirely suspecting him of being the murderer, because they read his thesis, they're like, well, you must think you're also an extraordinary man to be thinking that you can write about what it means to be extraordinary, right? And they were just at that moment indirectly poking at the wound, essentially, that caused him to be, that wound in his thinking that caused him to eventually go off and commit such a heinous murder, is that that ability to make another person be so small that their life is of little consequence, or their death is of positive consequence to you.
I really wanted to go into this too. The process, the way that Raskolnikov goes about his thinking, and the types of, because there's this amazing podcast called Last Podcast from the Left. So shout out to those guys, because they make some of the best content I've ever heard.
It's true.
and they often delve into serial killers very, very deeply, and not just into the stories and the murders and everything surrounding them, but they also go into the psychosis, the psychology of their actions, the way that they think, especially ones that have been interviewed afterwards and compliant and honest. And I picked up on a lot of and I don't know if this is Dostoevsky doing this or what this is, if it just mirrors it somehow, but the way that he thinks, the process type thinking of how he's going to go about killing this woman, he goes over every single detail along the way. You know
the
what I
level
mean?
of premeditation.
Yeah,
is,
he sews a pouch into his jacket lining specifically for the axe. He somehow, and this is also really cool, just that he picks up on the fact randomly that this woman is going to be home alone at this time while he is walking down the street or something like that, essentially. And just the providence and the way that he interprets that, the way that it's sort of like the signal to him.
That was the catalyst that made him want to do it, because as he was walking down the street, and I don't recall whether it was right after he had finished dropping off Marmeladov, but no matter what, he met Elisabetta, and he was talking to the people that owned the farm. Right beforehand, he was already thinking, like, this is kind of a stupid idea. It's not going to work out, and I should just potentially maybe go get a job. And that concept of moral luck, really, that he had the opportunity to listen to that. He could interpret that any way that he wanted to. He interpreted that as providence to his committing of the murder.
Yes.
And then the continual moral luck of him getting away with it, him being able to slip by, him being able to have the painter who belonged to that sect want to sacrifice himself for him. Like, every single aspect of the universe was leaning toward Raskolnikov staying free. But, and this is Dostoevsky's morality at work, but he wasn't allowed to have his crime without his punishment. Not whatsoever. It was unbelievably necessary for him to suffer in some way or another. And I really enjoyed how he always left a good bit of ambiguity in terms of Rodia's actions, because he was sick the whole time. If you recall, he had a very deep fever that caused him to, they called brain fever back in the day. That's just all they could call it back in the day.
There was immediately, I noticed a little bit of touch of like a unreliable narrator.
Quite.
Like you weren't quite sure because he was always in this delirium. But
and you could feel the fog in the prose, which is something that, oh man, like if I could somehow capture that genie in that bottle.
The number of times that Raskolnikov slipped in and out of sleep, you know, within a couple paragraphs of one another. You're like, what fucking day is it? What has been going on?
That dream about watching the horse get whipped continuously was, to this day, I'm still thinking about, like, what could the hell that possibly mean? Just watching that horse get whipped, and the guy is like, put more people on, and then the horse gets more tired and tired. And like, but it's mine. I'm gonna whip it to death.
Whip him, because he's mine. I own him. Yeah, that was really fucked up.
It really was, and it was not that. And once again, this might be our small mind that can't conceptualize every little aspect and minute detail of the story, but I bow to that one, because if somebody can give me a good interpretation of what that meant, please drop it in the comments. I would love to hear it or watch it or listen to it. You know,
I think there are plenty of points like that. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this podcast with you, because I know when you read a lot deeper, or maybe you just you read more into things. Whereas I'm more of like a sponge type thinker and taker. You really try to drive at what's in there, and so I have so many questions about this book.
It was absolutely wonderful, and to this day I'm still processing it every single time. And the beautiful thing about having such crystalline character archetypes made is your ability to bring them up inside of your head after you read them and think, hey, am I acting like a Rodia right now? Am I being just a cold dick for no reason? It puts you in check. It really does, because you already seen through this weird fantasy dimension, the potential ends to those kind of causes and effects. It's essentially like like a quasi determinism timeline where you can see what this could eventually lead you to. And it's really powerful to be able to read it, and I think it adds as to why we as a population are really grown into the whole serial killer mindset, watching true crimes and things like that. Why everybody is so intrigued by that, because I believe that the underlying subconscious feels that shadow creeping up. You're like, yeah, like that is how I would commit that murder, or no, what an idiot, no wonder he got caught.
That is kind of what made, for me, that's what made Raskolnikov an interesting character to me, was because of how much I already kind of felt like I knew the way that he was thinking,
his pathologies,
the way that I could sort of anticipate his methods, especially after that Providence quotation marks incident where he was like, oh, well, this is the universe telling me that it's all right to go ahead and kill this person.
Exactly. The universe already doesn't mean anything, but the universe is also giving me all of these signals that tell me I can kill somebody. How fortunate. How convenient of a morality.
That is, and it's weird how familiar. It's like eerily familiar to a lot of stories of processed serial killers. It's that same mentality of like, oh, the universe showed me this sign, and that means it's okay for me to kill this person.
Right. Like that, I don't remember the name of it, but I listened to it through the last podcast on the left, another shout out, about that one of the serial killers, I believe it was back in California, who would just walk into the house if the door was unlocked, because he believed that was an invitation essentially from like the universe or whatever he believed to kill these people. It's like, if you had locked the door.
Yeah, so lock your doors, people.
Yeah, honestly. That goes without saying.
Yeah.
That honestly goes without saying.
I think that was Bundy. Bundy used to like creep into sorority houses and shit, and they, obviously they were probably unlocked because it's on a college campus.
Right.
But I think that was part of it, and that's part of that twisted fucking kind of mindset to it. The same twisted mindset that Raskolnikov. Okay, what do we call him? Jekyll, right? That would be his Jekyll sign.
Yeah, Jekyll Rodia. Wait, I'm sorry. Is it Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or is it the other way around? Then that would be his Mr. Hyde. That would be Hyde Rodia.
Well, Hyde would be the rational one, right? Or
Dr. Jekyll is the normal person.
Oh, that's right.
He turns into Mr.
Yeah,
Hyde.
Mr. Hyde. Okay, you're right.
Yeah.
So that would be the Hyde.
Yeah, Hyde.
So that
Rodia.
would be the madman, so to speak, the one who
and
takes his philosophies to the extreme.
And how interesting how thin that wall is between them all the time. The book does a whole lot of dissecting when it is that the good Rodia comes out. So like when he automatically wanted to help that girl who was intoxicated on the park bench from that, they call him a dandy, or some guy that was just looking. I guess St. Petersburg just had people back in the day who were just looking for women who were too drunk, which I'm sure it still happens to this day.
Oh, man.
Everywhere, yeah. And he automatically wanted to help her find the police officer to help. But the moment that a couple minutes went by that he could think, he just fell into that whole cold logical system of his that he was like, why the hell am I caring right now? It's like, let her have her. And even the police officer was like, what? It almost felt like another person had walked into his being and taken over at that point, and he just walked away. He's like, whatever.
That's another interesting thing that you mentioned, because there is a lot of, this is another thing in that serial killer thing, is that I know Gacy was like this, and I think Bundy was also of this mindset that that they sort of blamed their murders and their behavior on another part of themselves that they couldn't control, that it was like some other personality. And that really echoes with Raskolnikov throughout the story, especially because the times like you just mentioned where he's extremely benevolent and generous, and just you're like he's being an angel he's giving his last ruble.
Even like either like a year or a couple months ago, he had just ran into a burning house to save a couple kids, and he like burned himself and stuff.
That's right.
From that.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, exactly. Like there are plenty of redeeming qualities about him, and I think that's the the work of an ace author, really, in terms of Dostoevsky really showcasing a full circled individual. Although he has pathologies that become murderous, he also has these redeeming aspects that Dostoevsky really tries to showcase can still be redeemed outside of him, that there is still some enough good inside of Rodia to warrant his
eventual redemption.
his eventual redemption.
Which we never get to read, really. We get a snippet,
Yep.
which is kind of bullshit. Yeah, what you were
It
telling
is just
me
a story
that,
for another day.
what happened? There was like a contract in a magazine or something. And
Yeah, this is actually one of the cool meta situations about the book, because Dostoevsky back in the day, he would write in a serial form. He would write into subscription magazines and just turn in the chapter by chapter. And at first, he wanted to create a book called Crime and Punishment and Redemption, where he actually went through the process of Rodia living in the Siberian camp, and through Sonia's help in those 7 years that he spent there, actually eventually getting to a point where he became a good Christian man, as with, a good Eastern Orthodox Christian man, as Dostoevsky would think is the perfect, the best
what
man.
he would idolize.
Yeah, what he would idolize is the best man.
Yeah.
And they were like, that's too long. That book is way too long. Sorry. So he decided that the best thing to do would just be to leave the crime and the punishment, and then allow us to think about the manner by which he redeems himself, because he lets you know that he does.
Yeah.
He just gives you the little black
In
paragraph.
the epilogue or whatever.
Yeah, he's
the
just
second
like,
epilogue.
he's like, yeah, eventually he gets out of prison and he manages to be able to make a good life with Sonia, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah.
And I
Which
think
is
that's
all.
just fine.
Yeah.
The story was already pretty long anyways.
And you know what? It was sad enough that it deserved a somewhat happy ending.
Exactly. Look, and an untarnished happy ending, because
Yeah.
I'm sure that those 7 years must have been hard for him to get to that point.
There was no Deus Ex Machina in
No.
this.
No,
There-
none whatsoever.
Redemption had to be had.
Because the crime was severe enough to warrant that long of a punishment, especially considering that the offender was such a staunch, both nihilist and exceptionalist, I would say, that he even to the moment that he was inside of the prison considered at moments that, what the fuck did I do? Like, I'm such an idiot.
Yeah.
Why did I do what Sonia said? I am so dumb. And it never went away all at once. There was never and this is the thing that I find is actually very important for people to note as they go through the process of forgiving themselves for whatever situation they might feel guilty about, is the fact that the redemption never comes in one step. You always teeter right back to the concept of, I could have gotten away with it. Like, what was the point of me even trying to do a redeeming aspect when I could have just continued living life, just hiding it from everybody.
So it was more like Raskolnikov had to. It's like he didn't have a choice in it. Either he was going to go mad, completely mad, or he was going to work through that redemption step by step, like you're talking about. Like, he had to actually. Because I've never killed a person, but I can imagine if I had, it would probably take a couple of years to try to normalize
Process the situation.
Yeah, to try.
Especially because of such a vulgar reason.
Right.
That you want to steal their money, and because you've already
And that's the most
identified
fucked up thing about that too, is that he never. It's like he killed her, and that was it. He hid everything that was of value initially in his apartment, and then he hid it under a rock, and he never used it to profit at all. It was just like, see, that's what really twists me about this guy, is that even though in the beginnings when he's talking about her as a louse and a plague on society, and he's like, I could get some money, he fucking kills her, and then eventually, whether it's because of his fucking fever or whatever it is, he never sells anything that he stole. He never.
Well, he can't. It's all dirty.
He planned ahead like that, sure, but like, dude, like something just. It was almost like he never even intended on using that shit to make money after a certain point.
I think that actually was used in a good way to exemplify the fact that he wasn't the person he thought he was. He wasn't this extraordinary man who could take his new plunder and his new riches like a Viking or, you know, like a great Viking or a warlord and be like, here we go, like I got all this money, like let me take it to another pawnbroker and get my cash and continue onward. He is not that kind of person. If that even is a proper classification for an extraordinary man, he wasn't.
Right.
This all was a very good experiment to showcase to Raskolnikov that he was more ordinary than most. Because in fact Raskolnikov does feel more than normal people, because even as we're talking about it, we're thinking like, man, what an idiot. Like there were so many avenues for him to have gotten away with it. As we were talking about moral luck, the universe was entirely in his favor.
He kept walking into situations that might tip that balance in any way. Which, to me or you as the reader, you know, what are you doing?
And even at the end of the day, the evidence that they had was circumstantial at best. If he would have fought and maybe gone through and had like a bit of a higher standing in society, he probably would have gotten away with it easy. But it was impossible for him to do so because his own temperament wouldn't allow it. He would either fall into a fever, or he would pass out, or he'd just get sick. That every time he thought about it, that there was absolutely no way to for him to move forward without actually having to pay for that crime. And you could really feel that, at least to me, whenever a good thing would happen with Razumin, his best friend, and Dunya, his sister, that they had fallen into a little bit of money, and they were beginning to think about opening a printing shop. That they were like, yeah, dude, we'll both just spend hours and we'll just write our books. Everything felt so happy and so right, but the amount of alienation that Raskolnikov felt because he could not in any way partake of that situation, that joy whatsoever.
He didn't allow himself that happy because he knew, like, deep down or whatever, he knew that sort of drove his
he was
actions.
he was tainted. He was, you know, not to get too, you know, biblically allegorical, but he was marked like Cain by that point, because nobody could touch him, and he knew that himself, that if he tried to get into this enterprise with them, like, it would potentially taint the enterprise too. It's like, oh, like, this publishing company got big, but oh my god, we came to find out 5 years later that this Raskolnikov guy, he actually did murder the person, right? Because he might have slipped up, you know, at some other point. Because I'm sure that Porfiry Petrovich, and he even mentioned it when he went over to his apartment, that he was not going to let him get away with it. He's like, I'm going to give you a couple days to kind of sort your affairs in order.
How crazy is this motherfucker? This fucking mindfuck of a character.
I know.
I've never experienced anything I've read a lot of fucking fiction, man. I've never experienced a character that was so much both unreliable narrator type aspect to it, and also like the way that he conversed with Raskolnikov was like all he was doing was constantly fucking with him, but at the same time he's constantly fucking with you as the reader because of his character.
He does a very good job of seeming like the fumbling kind of cop, where he kind of just falls into the case, and in reality, he's just being astute the whole time. He's playing the fool in order to hide how wise he is. Like, he actually has to, like, tone it back, because otherwise he'd give himself away.
Yeah, and he doesn't hide it all the time either. There are times when, like, you can see his ego slip up just a little bit, and then you can see him on this sort of high horse that he's created for himself. You know what I mean? Because he's so learned and sneaky and quite the detective type character.
It kind of seems like he's seen this kind of thing before. This kind of possession that Raskolnikov is going under, where he is kind of ideologically possessed, in the sense that he believes himself to be this extraordinary man that can get away with anything, and Porfiry is trying to kind of bring him back down to earth in as gentle of a way as he possibly can, because he explains to him that you're caught, buddy. There is no other place to run, because even if you leave, we'll come find you. So there will never be another moment where Raskolnikov will actually find peace if he continues to try to fight for his quote-unquote innocence, which actually kind of adds onto the alienation that we were already speaking on before.
But do you, because I still get this feeling that it was kind of a bluff when he did that.
Oh, you think Porphyry never actually had the evidence?
Okay, because you have the madman
Okay.
who has confessed to the murder. He's
true.
confessed to it. Okay? That's in the fucking law books or
It's
whatever
true.
it is. You know what I mean? And even though Porphyry he knew in his heart of hearts, he knew that Raskolnikov killed this person. You know, because he's the modern day fucking Sherlock Holmes or whatever. And
He was the first Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, before Sherlock Holmes.
By like 13 years, yeah.
Which is pretty fucking impressive.
Yeah, bravo, Dostoevsky.
It's very
I'm sure
cool.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle probably read Dostoevsky as he was thinking up Sherlock Holmes within his own mindscape.
I'm sure it was.
Oh, I'm sure he was, yeah.
That character perfectly portrays him too, in a lot of aspects. But he, just because he's smarter than he appears.
Exactly.
Which is what.
It's kind of a weird symbiosis between Sherlock Holmes and Watson, where Watson actually plays off the more fumbling role, and he actually kind of works as Sherlock Holmes' third eye in terms of the. Whenever the intellect misses the extra little bit of information that is actually necessary to piece the puzzle together.
And it's usually like something simple too. It's right, like
just simple admissions of guilt, which Raskolnikov is just dropping left and right all over town.
the moron.
Yeah, exactly. He can't talk to somebody without being like, "Hey, man, well, what if you committed a
What
murder?"
did you say about the murder? I know about it. Yeah, talk to me. Yeah, yeah, fucking maniac.
Honestly. Oh man. So Dunya, his sister. Let's move a little bit forward on the cast section. Sorry that one took like 45 minutes of time. But hey, you know, like we're everything's off the cuff here.
Yeah.
We're doing it all out of love. But in the same sense that Pulcheria and Dunya, they're the two closest
Mother
women's
and sister, respectively.
the two closest people in Raskolnikov's lives, and really the people that love him the most out of anybody else. To the point that, as far as the plot goes, Dunya was willing to
Completely forgive, right?
No, I'm talking about essentially prostitute herself in
Oh.
order to be able to ascend their family to a higher socioeconomic status.
Yeah.
And both Pulcheria and Rodia were entirely well aware of what she was doing. None of them hid their apprehension towards Lutzin. Lutzin was always, from the moment that you heard it from Pulcheria through her first letter to Rodia at the beginning of the book, how she... Oh, and it's awesome. This is the kind of thing that we as amateur writers love, is the ability to be able to hear the character through the prose, even if it's a letter that the characters are writing. It's not even the actual character like speaking, but you can hear the intonations of motherly love inside of the letter as she's explaining the whole scandal that Dunya had to go through because of Marfa Petrovna having thinking that she was actually being the mistress of Svidrigailov, but in reality it all came to be the fact that Dunya actually was of complete moral high standing. And I thought it was amazing, once again adding to the whole, I guess not moral luck, because Dunya in this instance was actually in the right, but to a certain degree too, because it's moral luck in the sense that Dunya fell victim to the circumstances of these higher society people thinking that she was some mistress, that she was just trying to get in with the rich guy, right?
Yep.
And eventually it came to pass through circumstance and both Svidrigailov's own changing of heart, that he actually ended up telling Marfa Petrovna that he actually was the one that was hitting on Dunya. And then Marfa Petrovna, being the little you hear of her, because she dies during the contemporary aspect of the book, during the present, she was a great person because she 180'd the moment that she actually heard the truth. She did not try to save face.
Yeah.
Pulcheria made it a point that actually she felt a little too flustered, about it, because she was telling everybody. She's like, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. There wasn't the house or salon inside of the village or town that they were living in that she wasn't talking about the fact that Dunya was an upstanding person, and oh my God, I am so sorry. And it's those little nuggets of like optimism that are so strange in a book so depressing as this one, isn't it?
Well, it kind of. I don't know if he did this on purpose, but it certainly kept me going. It's like, because there are really serious bouts of some of the most depressing, decrepit avenues of humanity, the things that do happen still to
And
this
so
day.
early on, I mean, Marmeladov,
Oh my god.
the drunkard Marmeladov, Semyon, was in and of himself just a perfect crystallization of almost every kind of societal ill that plagues us.
But he was so honest. He was so genuine in his
Assessment of himself.
yes. He truly understood the depths of the kind of pit that he'd driven himself into and his family. Like
He seems like a very, very unfortunate victim of his times, because
Yeah.
if he were to be born now and he were to be a normal man now, he could potentially really do well with some therapy and actually being able to perhaps get some medication or just speak through his problems and his alcoholism and why he does it. I found it very interesting how one of the most strange justification that I have ever heard for alcoholism, and in terms of the fact that his daughter Sonia, she had to become a prostitute in
there's
order.
enough right there. 100%. Like I don't know if you've ever struggled with fucking drinking too much, but can you imagine having a daughter who, to benefit the goodwill of their family, had to go into prostitution? Can you, like, the weight of that shit on your mind? And this takes place right away in the beginning of the book. It's what, the third chapter, I think, of the book.
Thereabouts. It might as well have happened right away. I mean, considering the amount of significance that went through, and the fact that, and this is one of the small nuggets of the book that just kind of just falls through the cracks sometimes, that I don't hear a lot of people mention, is that Semyon mentions the fact that right before he and Raskolnikov are there together at the bar, he had just finished seeing Sonia, and Sonia had just given him the last little bits of money that she had actually just made, and he said she knew that he was going to go waste it on drink.
Yeah.
But even then, and this is, once again, sorry that I'm dropping into biblical allegories, but listening to all these Jordan Peterson biblical lectures just got me going, you know. It kind of speaks to Sonia's ability to respect the spirit of the father. The fact that even though her father is a drunkard, she still sees him in such a light and in such a position that she's still deferent. And I know that a lot of people that actually have dealt with abuse and have dealt with people that are alcoholics and take advantage of people like that would, you know, at this moment just absolutely decry that kind of mentality as something that is a victim's mentality. And
Right.
it totally is. But within the context of the story, what Dostoevsky was, at least to my mind, trying to showcase was the fact that Sonia, even to the very bitter end, did not see her family lineage and herself and everybody around her as above redemption. And she is pretty much the Christ-like figure in the entire book that showcases that for everyone, because she is both Marmeladov's unfortunate catalyst for him to eventually continue going on until he dies by that carriage ride, but she also works as the catalyst for Rodia's eventual redemption. So it kind of goes to show that that kind of light in the world doesn't always lead to a positive outcome, but it's still necessary. It's kind of a bit of an unhinged benevolence that she had. Like, there was absolutely no way to kind of get on her bad side.
Right.
Because, I mean, Katerina Ivanovna, you know, her stepmother, she made her feel bad about being a prostitute, even though she knew she had to go be a prostitute in order to be able to give money to her, in order for her to be able to feed Polya Kolya and Lida.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, what exactly is it that she's gonna do? That's probably one of the most hurtful things to my mind in terms of what the book showcases as a depressing aspect of society, is the fact that the people that you're trying to help the most are the ones that slap you, backhand you right after you're done helping them. It really adds credence to the nihilistic aspect of philosophy, if you really want to delve into that and fall into that pit of thinking, because the world gives you plenty of reasons why not to give a shit anymore, and if not in your life, you can go and extract them from somebody else's life.
Oh, easy. Yeah. This book right there. Like,
Right?
I mean, or any piece of fiction similar. That
Especially because they're for the most part meta representations of a character quality that a lot of people inhabit, and that inhabits a lot of people. Really, is the biggest thing. Like these archetypes of being inhabit a lot of people, and a lot of people are cold and calculating like Rodia, and but at the same time have these odd sprites of unbelievable goodness that they do such amount of good in such short amount of time that you can't even believe it.
It's almost like it's a natural response, or like, so it's like a deeper, like almost biological response. To me, it felt like during the first half, at least, of Crime and Punishment, when Rogia was really feverish all the time, it felt like his intentions were ambiguous.
Dude, totally, yeah. The entire time that he was going through those premeditated motions of wanting to kill Alyona Ivanovna and trying to think about the best way to do it, and the fact that we actually start the book with him going through and him doing like a dry run of what it's going to look like when he goes and kills her, because he goes and he gives her the old watch or whatever it was, and then he's scoping the room out. He's like, all right, 2 locks, all right. It's like, there's nothing here, there's a chest over there.
Not only that, but the author continuously refers to this action throughout the first couple chapters, which is calling it, or like the thing. Like, it's always like the thought, the thing that's on the outskirts of like, what the fuck are they talking about? But you know exactly what they're talking about as you start going.
It's actually kind of a precluding to the fact that Rodia isn't as much of a badass as he thinks he is, because he can't even actually say what he's going to do. He has to veil it with the thing and the thought. So he has to essentially distance himself from the eventual action.
Separate himself from like the person, the Rodia that is gonna do the killing.
The actual extraordinary thought.
The Jekyll.
Yeah.
No, the Hyde.
The Hyde.
The Hyde.
Sorry guys, we're just keep messing that up.
You know the one.
You know the one, yeah.
The bad one. Yeah.
But yeah, I love the fact that Dunya wasn't made to be some sort of like supplementary character, really. She was given her strong own arc, especially when it came to showing face and keeping her shoulders back with Lutzen. Because the moment that even before she got the money, she wasn't about to allow herself to be driven back and forth like Lutzen wanted as that thankful little poor girl that he had. So he's like an odd weird fetish fantasy.
I think that's pretty fetish.
Yeah, it was a real weird fetish, that he couldn't wait to have this really poor girl that would just swoon all over him, because oh my god,
he's
thank you,
savior. I get exactly what you're saying.
It's so odd, and it's kind of one of these these weird like Napoleonic kind of complexes where he thinks that the only way to be able to run a relationship is through dominance. And I don't know if anybody has listening to this has bothered to read Notes from Underground, but the Underground Man, which is actually a prelude to this book, kind of essentially has the mentality of Lutzen, wherein he believes that the only way to be able to have relationships is through a subjugated mentality. He can't have friends unless he's lording something over his friends, or having something on them, or like being more forceful than they are. That's unfortunately the only way that they can conceptualize those kind of relationships, because they can't see it as a reciprocal, a little back and forth all of the time. It has to be either you take it and I'm gonna give it.
It's like a power thing, kind of.
Exactly.
That's what it sounds like. That's what it sounds like.
It's exactly what it is, and how fortunate that Dunya comes to that money and manages to be able to pretty much take off the sheep's clothing on the wolf that Lutzin really was, because during that dinner that they had with Raskolnikov and Razumir and all of them, the fact that Lutzin would even try to do that ugly, underhanded ultimatum of being like, no, it's like if your brother shows up, I'm not gonna show up. It's like, oh my gosh.
It's weird too that like I felt like I was kind of on that guy's team up until that point too.
Especially because you just realized that that dude is a murderer, right?
Yeah. It.
I think it's perfect because it really showcases the fact that he as an author bothered to make all of the characters dimensional enough that none of them fall into this weird, oh, he's the bad guy kind of situation.
Right.
Everybody has their own motives for being, and that's actually kind of one of the more deeper aspects of the book, is the banality of evil, right? It's like Rodya does this evil act for the most banal reasons, because he wants money, because he's poor, because he thinks that this old lady is stifling the community some way. Yeah, some way. Whatever weird fucking personification of unjust that he thinks it is, and then Lutzin with his weird power fantasies and shit like that, it's like all of that stuff is just so banal. It's like the ugliest human part of them, right? It's like there's nothing extraordinary about them, even though they find themselves to be the most extraordinary people in the story. If there's any real parallels to be had between Rodya and Lutzin, is the fact that they both think themselves to be extraordinary. They're like, Lutzin's like, I'm a lawyer, and I went to the military and I had a great, like he has all of the medals to showcase the kind of person that he perceives himself to be, and society has perpetuated that thought inside of his head. While Rodya, although they're all essentially fabricated within his own mind, he holds himself in the same level of esteem, even though they're both wrong. They're both wrong for different reasons, but exactly the same way.
It's amazing how well that he can articulate both of those ideas, both of those argument strains between those two characters too.
There's so much to be learned.
Oh my god.
But on a lighter note, wasn't it so great though when Lutzin got caught at that at the dinner scene? I mean, if we're gonna talk about the more comedic aspects of a unbelievably dreary and pessimistic book, I mean, Katerina Ivanovna's
such a sad
supper was such an, oh my gosh, it was the true roller coaster of emotion, because I don't know if I've ever mentioned this to you, but I always have such a weird feeling when it comes to reading lies in a fictional book, like listening to a character lie who the character themselves is a lie in the grand scheme of things, that it just feels even sadder than a real lie, really. Because at least a real lie is based on some foundation of truth. In this situation, it's entirely fabricated, and the fact that Katerina Ivanovna had to go through all that posturing, even through her unfortunate consumption, her having to cough blood,
she was literally dying the entire party.
Yeah, she was dying throughout that entire party. And even then, she never let go of the post that she was better than everybody, always chin high, looking down at everybody that was eating of that disgusting office worker that had come in, who knew who that guy was, everybody.
She didn't even pay for the fucking funeral. That was not her funding that funeral for Marmeladov. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Marmeladov's funeral and dinner were all funded by Rodya. He was the guest of honor.
He was the one that paid for everything.
Yeah.
Like some crazy person. It's just... I'll pay for him. That drunk man that I met at the bar the other night who is about. To be fair, I highlighted that section of my book because that entire conversation between Rodia and Marmeladov in the bar was one of the best beginnings to a book I think I've ever read. It was an amazing pull into. There's this thing that Dostoevsky does with all of his characters, whether or not it's his voice that's saying them or the opposer's voice, the argument to what he thinks, which you can never really tell in the moment, but he has this amazing ability to procure those ideas through dialogue, through his characters. Razumin and Porphyry.
Yeah.
Porphyry. Those two characters in particular really stood out to me as far as being able to chisel out using the liberties at the time because they're ramblers, both of them, but using their dialogue to chisel out their character as you read it. You really get to know these people just in a conversation, which was one of the first things that you pointed out to me as far as Dostoevsky's writing is his ability to make these characters feel hyper real only through their speech. And there's another unique thing that he does, probably because of its like subscription-like nature, but he will every once in a while fucking, as the character is talking, he's saying the things that are happening in the background of like, and now we're at the shop, and now we're here, and now we're back to the place where we started. And you can't even believe that he just pulled that shit.
I know, it's just
like, okay, I
it's
guess.
so fun, like in the retrospect, right?
Yes, it is very fun. Silly.
Yeah, let's talk about Razumin.
Yes.
I love that guy.
That guy
so
is
much.
He feels like your best friend that was that you grew up with that was always kind of drunk a little bit. So he just spoke his mind 100% of the time.
Yeah, but he was always onto something positive. He was essentially the anti-Rodya, because he was exactly in the same position as he was, in the sense that he was a poor student that he couldn't afford to go to law school anymore, but instead of, and once again, this is where Dostoevsky does a great job of not antagonizing his protagonist too much, because yes, Rodya was sick, but at the same time, aside from that, Dmitri was in the same foil, and he decided that he was going to go get a job. He's like, I'm going to go and translate these books. Sometimes I even made it up, just to make the deadline. It doesn't even matter.
Dmitri is Razumin.
Yeah, Dmitri is Razumin.
Dmitri, yes, okay, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Because they all have 2 or 3 names for some reason.
Yeah, you can call him Dmitri, you can call him Razumin.
Okay,
I like Razumin. Yeah,
we're still on the same page.
Yeah, totally.
It's hard to, even the book does it.
Totally. It's one of the weird idiosyncrasies of, I don't even know if it's like Russian literature, but just the fact that they either say the whole name or they say the nickname, and sometimes they do both.
Or it's a third-party name that's like the super informal.
Yeah, it absolutely makes no sense from the outside looking in at first, but eventually you do begin to pick up on when it is that they're about to drop the more formal and informal names, and you begin looking forward
more
to
familiar.
it. Yeah, exactly. You become. It's all a human effort, right? So you as a human, you quickly pick up on what the dance is for every single culture. Although at first it may seem alien to you, it doesn't take long before you're like, oh yeah. Oh, obviously that's why she's called Katerina Ivanovna Marmeladov, and
I feel like they're just having fun with us.
Honestly,
like,
and why Sonia?
That's a little too long.
And why Sonia is a nickname for Sophia?
It doesn't make any fucking sense.
It makes no
Especially
sense.
the first time you're reading it. It's a bunch of. I'm sorry. Go on about Dmitri / Razumin.
Well, I mean, the whole thing that I love about him is just the fact that when Raskolnikov goes and sees him right after he commits the murder, and he thinks that he's just going to go see him for the last time, Razumin is just so happy to see him because he's got all these big plans, He's like, like I got like these 5 extra books that I told him I'd finish by Tuesday, and I was hoping that I was gonna see you, so then I could give them to you. He kind of has that feeling of that friend that you can not see for a couple months, but then the moment that you see him, you're picking up exactly
Right
where
back
you
where you
left
left
where you
off,
left off. Like he has absolutely no filter in terms of the worrying of time. He
Well,
was.
he's also like that ideal, like for the non-judging, the will have your back kind of character too. That you can tell immediately.
Oh, and he was ready to fight a good couple times for Rodia.
For Rodion,
He
yeah.
thought that whenever he thought that somebody was trying to do some odd insinuation, he was just chest out first.
Yeah, like how fucking dare you talk about my friend like that?
Yeah, it's like murder. Like that's a big deal. You don't just fucking go
You can't
throwing
just
that word.
fucking
You don't
say
throw that word around like that, right? And it's really interesting the formalities of those of those older kind of cultures that certain words were just taboo. It's like, oh, you want to go duel? It's like those are dueling words, right? It's like those are the kind of words that like we go out and actually like do something about them. And not to advocate for those, for that kind of hyper machismo or like that kind of hyper reactionary mentality or in any sort of way, but it does showcase the high level of spirit that people used to have back in the day. Like maybe because people had a lot less to think about, the little things that they could think about meant a lot more to them. That to the point that they were willing to die for them. It's like, you're disrespecting my friend? No, I'm about to second him for this duel that's about to go down.
Luckily, I think the value of life has gone up too, in that amount of time. Maybe just in this corner of the world more so than other corners, but regardless, for sure.
Yeah, it at least seems alien to us. We
Right.
unfortunately can never speak on a macroscopic scale, but from what it looks like here, it just doesn't. That just doesn't seem like the kind of thing you would ever even think of doing, right?
Well, if you
Getting
try to,
so angry that I'm gonna go pull out my gun and we're going to not have a shootout, but literally stand next to each other and walk 5 steps and then turn around and shoot each other, like that's for real.
Yeah.
Right? It isn't just I'm gonna go catch this guy when he's not looking at me and shoot him. Like
it's more of an honor situation, more of a respect based. There's something principally.
right,
that
it's like
needs
we're
to be
meeting
dealt
as
with.
equals,
Right.
and my equal is going to kill me, or
Right.
I'm going to
Or I'm
kill
gonna
it.
kill them.
Yeah. It's very, very, very strange. How
Now we do
interesting-
that with money.
Yeah, how interesting how quickly the cultural customs have changed in terms of value systems, because even here in the United States that was a thing. I mean, that's how what's his name, Hamilton, ended up dying by a bird's hand because they had a duel, right? And it's the kind of thing that only a couple hundred years ago was absolutely customary. Of course you did that. How could you not?
Yeah.
People in the community would actually look at you funny if you didn't actually
It was
go
an
duel.
honor situation. Oh, more deeply, this is a dick waving situation.
Yeah, it was most certainly a
It's
dick waving situation.
crazy the amount of opportunity and prosperity that America has achieved based solely upon dick waving. And also how a lot of people died.
Yeah.
A whole lot of dick waving. Isn't a lot of war just kind of dick waving? I don't know if we're getting off topic. Seems like.
No, not necessarily, I feel, because war, at least, the older kind of wars, closer to the contemporary efforts of crime and punishment, were kind of more of a theatrical aspect. It's like millions and thousands of people died, but it was like we met each other, and then we lined up, and then we went forth, and whoever wasn't able to actually keep up, they lost.
It's hard to familiarize with something like this, having not ever been a part of it. I feel like fiction does its job, but the personalization, the really close, like I think
The viscerality of war.
right, yeah, that I feel like the closest that I've gotten to it when it comes to cinema is probably something like Gangs of New York, where it was really violent and bloody and close quarter. It was all metal and skin. There was no guns or bullets or rockets or anything like that. And I feel like the beginning of that movie was maybe even more visceral than something like Saving Private Ryan, which was a horror fest for the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
There's something about that.
But even then, there's some
Barbaric.
impersonality in like a bomb landing on you and then exploding you, as opposed to somebody going by and ripping your ear out,
Right.
out, right?
Or he has a hatchet.
Or a hatchet, yeah, just
Oh my God.
having to hack somebody,
Yeah.
which goes back to Crime and Punishment and Rodia's actual crime.
Just the the method. Oh my God.
The
Yeah,
fact
go
that-
on, because
the fact that he like just split her skull essentially right in the middle, and it wasn't even. I mean, I guess it depends on the interpretation that you're reading, but I mean, in mine, I think it was a hatchet. So
Yeah.
it's like it must have been a small axe.
Yep.
So it had to have been
That's
a
what I
couple
thought.
cleaves.
Yeah.
Or or something
Over a
like
good
that.
heavy one. But regardless, the fucking. Well, how far are we into the book at this point in time? When he is this like the 5th chapter of the book?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Something like that. It is basically the beginning of the story.
It all happens within part 1, at least.
Right. The fucking horror. Oh my God, dude. There are few books or movies that I've read or watched that are so depressing so fucking fast, regardless of how much you like or dislike the protagonist.
And the level of paranoia that he was able to actually showcase in his words right after he kills both Aliona and Lisabetta. And, he like stuffs that stuff in his pockets, you know what I mean? He has to go shut the door. He locks it, and then the two people are
And
coming
they're
in, they're
knocking at the
knocking. It's
door.
like, wait a minute. It's like, if she's not here, it's like if she's not, it's like she's supposed to be here. Like, she never locks the door if she's, if she's here. And then it's how interesting how closely knit that kind of community feel. Like, that kind of gives you like a little glimpse of the community. Like, everyone kind of knows where everybody's schedule is, to the point that everybody automatically knows when something's off. That we're actually so well interconnected that no matter what, Rodia was gonna eventually either get caught or something was gonna go awry, because Aliona, was such an integral part of the community. Even though he saw her as a louse and as a negative aspect, she was still so well interweaved that somebody was going to notice, because the only person that he had considered at the beginning of his plan was Lisabetta, right? Like, that was the only person that he thought could potentially foil his plan. And even though Lisabetta did foil his plan, she wasn't the one that actually gave it away. It was more people. I mean, like, more people and more variables and more chaos was always coming because of who she was and the fact that people were always looking for her. I mean, by the time that, in the short instance, in like the 5 minutes that he took to kill both of them, 2 more clients were already coming in. So it's like, it was such a revolving door that there was absolutely no way to be able to really get away with it, even though he did. That was, just kind of one of those moral luck or plot situations, just to kind of move the story forward, no matter how you want to look at it.
Yeah. Well, I think that was probably more important to him as an author to, even though he never finished the redemption aspect of it, to really tell the story of what would happen when somebody takes this moral line of thinking argument too far or indirectly and follows through with it. And that's, I'm sure that's
probably exactly what he wanted to showcase at the end of the day. It's like one of the first examinations of the, as we were saying, the mind of the serial killer, and the cold logic that you have to put yourself into in order to be able to even begin premeditating those kind of actions. Because to normal folks like us, that have never actually had or wanted or actually murdered someone.
right. But here's the thing, though, is like, I don't know, if you're gonna genuinely ask yourself this question, have you ever thought about killing somebody?
Oh, of course.
Right? Most people have,
Of course.
in some aspect or another. Have you? And then there's a lot of interesting questions that follow with that too. What were what was the situation going to be like? How would you kill them? what would cause you to do it? What would be the breaking point? I feel like a lot of these ideas, these things that people don't actively think about are pretty well expressed through Rodia, through his pattern of thought, as psychotic as it is.
Yeah, he wore his shadow on
Yeah.
his sleeve.
Yeah.
Once again, the wall between the good Rodia and the bad one was so thin that sometimes it was really hard to tell who was leading or who was driving the ship at any given time. And it's really interesting how even then the society doesn't give up on him. Porphyry, knowing, even if what you're saying was right, that it was a bluff and that it was all circumstantial evidence, and
he kind of admitted to it.
Oh, for sure.
Well, or at least he bluffed admitting to it in the bluff. But
no, and you're totally entirely right. And then the fact that he probably would have had to give up a good fight in order to be able to put Rodia in prison.
Yeah.
If Rodia would have stuck to his guns and been like, I didn't kill nobody. Like, can you prove it? No, you can't prove it. And this the painter, is saying that he did it. So I don't even understand why I'm wasting my time here. And the thing is that Rodia is an articulate enough person, and they showcase this so beautifully throughout the book, that he can examine and dissect an argument so perfectly that he could have totally been able to weasel his way out of whatever potential crime or punishment that they might have given him.
I think he does a particular effort into driving that into your mind, that like he could get away with this. He absolutely could, but that's not how the story goes. That's not how people are supposed to react.
And even to the very end, like literally, right? Not counting the prologue, I believe, that he goes into the police station and he's talking about how, that painter, he's like confessing. I was like, I think everything's going fine. I think we're like, this is an open and shut case. Like that's what the office workers are telling him, and he's like, oh sweet, and he like walks out, and then he sees Sonia. The literal representation of his ideal outside, still staring at him, and he's like, God damn it, like, and he has to like turn heel and go turn himself in there, because there is absolutely no way that he's actually going to be able to live with himself. Like, he can exist, but he'll most certainly not have any life whatsoever. It's a very interesting thing to consider. I mean, I myself, not being much of a spiritualist or a moralist really to any degree, to have the story be fabricated in such a way that the protagonist eventually has to get his due. He has to get his due, is something that is, at least to me, a bit dissonant, because although I understand what Dostoevsky is trying to drive at the same time, maybe it's because I am, it's my inner Rodia, showing, but I still have those feelings of what an idiot. Like, how could he possibly have allowed himself to fall for those sentimental, thoughts?
Pitfalls.
Yeah, those little sentimental pitfalls of thinking that, who gives a shit what this prostitute girl thinks of you, right?
Or that's the sheriff, or this fucking mother of this, Yeah.
It's so interesting, the fact that how much of his own self-respect he underpins on what Sonia thinks of him.
Yes.
Somebody who's supposed to be, in the macroscopic scale, a bit of a dreg of society. And yet, to this murderer, she is like the pinnacle of virtue. And how, once again, this is Dostoevsky's Eastern Orthodox Christianity, showcasing itself, plain in sight, is the conceptualization that nobody is above Christ's redemptive power, right? That as long as you understand forthrightly what you're doing, you can still find some sort of warmth in the bosom of Christ, and and in this sense, Rodia was able to find that warmth in the bosom of Sonia, who was supposed to be that representation of Christ.
Of Christ, yeah.
In this book,
Yeah.
right.
The whole reason that he went to Siberia, that he accepted his redemption,
and the fact that he wasn't put in like the firing squad, or he wasn't given a life sentence, is the fact that just as Porphyry had said, and I'm sure that even though they never really mention it in the book, I believe, but they, they kind of leave that up to your interpretation. But I believe that Porphyry probably had a good, strong hand in him only getting 7 years for a murder. I mean, 7 years for a murder? Dude, that's fucking nothing.
Yeah, it's 25 to life here. So
yeah, that's absolutely nothing, especially for 2 murders, one premeditated and another manslaughter. That's ridiculous, right? But once again, it goes to showcase what Dostoevsky wants to exemplify as the right society, the one that doesn't just discard the criminal that does wrong. It's like, yeah, you fucked up. You fucked up. You did. You fucked up. But we can still potentially do something with you, and we can. There's some way for you to be able to come back into the fold and not feel so alienated. Because who's to say that within those 7 years, and this is my own hopeful optimism, that Razumin, bad boy Razumin and Dunya, they got married, they might have had some kids, they had a successful publishing company, and by the 7-year mark, when Raskolnikov is able to come back into the fold, no longer feeling alienated, no longer feeling like he's going to tarnish the reputation of the situation worse than he could potentially already do so, he can come back with open arms. Razumin and Dunya, although Pulcheria unfortunately dies before he's able to come back, he has a support structure that is actually able to await for him. So because of that, he doesn't have to fall into an even worse nihilistic pit, because it would be horrendous if, after committing such a heinous act and him going through the punishment, that he has nothing to look forward to after the fact.
Right.
That is the kind of thing that essentially engenders a repeat offender, because at that point, and this is something that everybody knows, the fact that a felon who has nothing to look forward to on the outside is more than likely to go right back into the system, because at least that is the devil they know. That is a situation that they understand how to posture in, how to move forward in, and
that's exactly the reason for recidivism. And I think there are countries, a lot of those that are more progressive in their disciplinary structures, that are leaning more towards rehabilitation than incarceration. I think that's where America and its more privatized prison industrial complexes is kind of falls short. You know what I mean? We
have given up entirely on the rehabilitation aspect of the incarceration.
I'm as far as like, nobody wants to sound like a bleeding heart liberal, but it makes sense to help people. And
I mean,
everybody can be terrible.
Most of the most harrowing and inspirational stories are those from which you hear somebody who was an ex-convict of whatever sort, who was able to find some way to be able to not rectify what they had done, because there's no way to rectify a past action, but at least bolster themselves and continue to fortify what they were once seeking to destroy through their new present actions. And isn't that what we really want? Yeah. I mean, it's one of those situations, again, of like Rodia, where we in a macroscopic aspect are thinking that we're more extraordinary than these people that are doing these, heinous actions, where we give them no chance to come back into the fold in any sort of way. So at that point, what else can you do except, when a person or an animal is put into a corner, except bite right back in the same way it did before?
It only makes sense.
It only makes sense.
That seems like the only, yeah.
So Svidrigailov. Now that's
yeah.
now that we've let our heart for the more sympathetic kind of aspects of the villainism and the antagonism, now we're speaking about Svidrigailov, and a man that, when you first hear of him, it's a very, at least to me, a very ambiguous kind of personification as to who hearing about.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, he kind of sounds shitty because he was trying to hit on Dunya, and, you know, he was married to Marfa Petrovna,
Yes.
and all that stuff. Like, yeah, that was shitty, and the fact that he actually tried to lie at first.
Well,
And,
and the first story that you hear about him is sort of a misrepresentation of something that actually happened. That later on in the story is it Dunya that clears that up about that she's like he didn't actually beat me or whatever. Is that the story?
it wasn't even so much beating. It was just like he grabbed her by the arm, and he was like just trying to talk to her about like hitting on her like really really hard. You know, like because he's like he's a sensualist. I think that's the best way to express it. He's like he just wants what he wants right now, and it got the best of him in that situation. And he had written some letters to her that Maria had. That Marfa had unfortunately seen, and that was the catalyst of the falling apart, because she was the governess of their children and stuff like that. But Svidrigailov, at least to me, when you first hear of him and then you first meet him, he did seem like a very amicable fellow,
He seems like the genuine character to me. Like, every time you hear him speak, you're like, hey, I can trust this guy. He's not saying anything that's crazy or weird. I don't pick up on anything just yet. And that's sort of the intuition that I had about him up until the end of the book, when, very unsuspecting to me, he shot himself in the head, and I don't really understand why he had done that until you sort of shed a little bit of light on
his pedophilia.
Yeah. I did not realize that Svidrigailov was a pedo guy. It's hard to remember a book start to finish, but the parts that I remember him in, he always seemed like a very amicable, reasonable person who, for whatever reason, was being very benevolent with his cash monies, and I guess I never really thought anything of it until you brought that up, and because him shooting himself in the head was very abrupt and surprising for me, and I didn't really understand him.
And I think therein lies the sophistication of Dostoevsky's prose, because it wasn't until the bar scene at the very end that when Raskolnikov ends up meeting Svidrigailov, and he has that wife, that mother and daughter like dancing for him and stuff, that he never comes right out and says it, but he insinuates and kind of notes to Raskolnikov the fact that he pretty much raped a teenage mute girl, and then she ended up hanging herself because of what happened. And even the new wife that he was going to get was this like little 13-year-old girl that he was dropping so much money on the parents that they were like, oh yes, awesome, like thank goodness that you're taking her away. It was his money managed to be able to hide, his money and his philanthropy managed to be able to hide a lot of the darker aspects of what he was actually doing with that money.
Even from me.
Even from you,
even from me, having read the book, I did not pick up on this shit.
Right.
I didn't pick up on any of it.
And isn't it so scary how a psychopath like that can actually go about hiding themselves in such an amiable manner, even in
he was so
fiction
genuine.
and prose?
He was so likable.
It kind of makes you want to just put your guard up even more in terms of the people around you, because you never really know who it is that has all of these dark inclinations, and what exactly is it they're trying to scrub away with all of this philanthropy and like this benefactory. It's.
I will say that this book definitely didn't make me trust people more.
One would only hope so.
There was nothing about it that inclined me to believe in people more.
Aside from the little aspects, as we were talking about, the potential redemptions that people could have, but even then, those are few and far in between. There are plenty of characters that in this book alone that they never really get their comeuppance. I mean, if you think about Lutzen, he gets, egg on his face after the party, and then he runs away, and then nothing ever comes of it afterward.
I'm sure his life is probably better off.
His subplot, is entirely just gone, and it doesn't.
Why fuck with that crazy family?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, if anything, everybody's better off not knowing any more about him, really, at that point, and that kind of.
Well, that's interesting. It's like, why was he a punching bag then? Why was he sort of just because he was all haughty or whatever?
Why was he a punching bag in the story?
Yeah.
I don't think he was a punching bag. He just personified really, really nasty qualities.
Just arrogance and generally being very arrogant and seeming more important than other people, and that's why he was able to.
He had a bit of an antichrist feel to him because he wanted to save a poor person because they were going to idolize him.
Oh yeah.
Not because of the good qualities behind the actual act themselves.
It's weird for me to try to draw a distinction between that line of thinking and the same one that Svidrigailov had about. Because it seemed like sort of the same redemptionist kind of qualities that he was like, I'm gonna give all this money away because of my philanthropy, and you know what I mean. But it was kind of the same thing for, even though as the reader you pretty much hate Lutzen. He sort of displayed the same qualities as.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like they thought that their money could save them in some way, because you got to remember that Svidrigailov's money all came from the fact that he quote unquote might have poisoned his wife and killed her. Yeah, and now
probably did.
Yeah, and he probably did. Yeah, I mean, and considering
say shit about fucking Raskolnikov. He's like, I get it, dude.
Oh no, he was going to. Remember, all of his philanthropy was actually just a means to be able to get be shed in better light in front of Dunya because he wanted her back. Svidrigailov, he wanted her back, and he even resorted to blackmailing her. Yeah. In order to be able to get her to submit to him, essentially. But she managed to be able to get the best of him because she's not an idiot. She's just as wise as Raskolnikov, but she doesn't fall for the pitfalls of nihilism and unfortunate reactionary mentality that her older brother does.
Bred the murderous thoughts.
Yeah, that unfortunately plagued Raskolnikov all the way until the bitter end. Mm-hmm. And I think with that we're gonna cut it off. There's probably maybe like a good 5 hours left of content that this book could give us in terms of analysis, but
somewhere in there.
I think for now we've delved deeply enough that whoever's listening can have enough nuggets for themselves to really parse through. If you got any more, got any more things or questions or suggestions, please drop them in the comments. Give us some love, give us some hate, whatever you want to give us. We're here for you, because unfortunately we just have this weird desire to just want to keep giving more and more content on what we think is
we just
interesting things.
Well, the more we talk about it, the better it gets.
I think so too, and I think everybody can be better off for it the more everybody expresses themselves both independently and authentically. And with those killer thoughts, we're going to be leaving you with a good day and good night.
Good night.